Hello, everybody. Today we talk about the very dreaded, very feared, and very mystical planet Rahu. Welcome to my channel. This is Tina Chaudhary, and a very warm namaste. Now, don't forget, we're still open taking entries for the giveaway for this beautiful, stunning box of stuff in it. So on this video, you can do subscribed on this video as well. And then I can still put your name in for the giveaway. So go in the comments and subscribe to my channel, and then just say subscribed in the comments, and I can still put your name in to win this beautiful giveaway. If you want to know what it is, I'll put a link in the description box to see. You can watch the video to see what's in this. On February 22nd, Mars will transit onto the next house. It's currently in Aries, so it moves on to the house of Taurus. And guess who's already there? Rahu is already there. It's been there since September of 2020, and Rahu stays in the same house for 18 months, so it's planning on hanging out there for a bit. So Rahu and Mars are going to be in the same house. Now, they're both pretty fiery, opinionated, strong planets. They're both malefic planets, and so the transit of Mars into the house where Rahu's sitting is a very, very important planetary transit. It means a lot of things for the world and for yourselves as well. Now, in order to do predictions based on ascendants on what this transit means for everybody, it's very important for us to understand Rahu first. So I'm going to do this in two parts. I'm going to do this video to explain Rahu, and then in my next video I'll do the predictions for the transit of Mars and into Taurus, and where it meets it's not so friendly Rahu. So you need to watch this video first and then go to the next video that I'm going to put out for the Mars transit. So the story goes like this, that Rishi Kashyap's daughter Simhika married a demon called Viprasiddhi, and then they had a child called Swarbhanu. And so because he was the daughter of the Rishi lineage and his father was a demon, he was actually considered neither a god or a demon. And the gods didn't want to do it with anything to do with him. They said, well, you're not a god because you're not pure god. You know, both your parents are not gods. So he had no choice but to become part of the demons, which the demons didn't care who became part of their tribe. So he became part of the demons. But Swarbhanu was obsessed, because he insisted. He said, well, half of my lineage is from the god side, pure side, so I want to be considered a god. So, and he became obsessed with this, that I want to be part of the gods and I don't want to be considered a demon, and this is just not fair. So all his life he became obsessed with that thought and how he could become considered a god. So he tried different tactics, very, conniving tactics. He would go to people or gods and, whisper in their ear and try to do all these little ploys and tactics on how he could be considered a god, and none of them worked. Well, one day came when it's, the famous churning of the ocean between the gods and the demons. They churned the ocean so the nectar of immortality would come out. Well, finally they churned and the nectar of immortality came out, and it was agreed before the churning that the gods would consume this nectar so they could become immortal. Well, they lined up, the nectar came out, and all the gods lined up to take a few drops or sip a few drops of it, and Lord Vishnu came down to give each one a few drops of it, and so they had lined up, kind of like the COVID vaccine, but anyway, so they lined up, and Swarbhanu saw that as a great chance to take part of that nectar consuming ritual. So what he did was he disguised himself as a god, and he went and stood in the line in between the sun god and the moon god. So he went and stood in between them, and as they were taking the sips, he had just taken a few sips disguised as a god. Sun and moon god realized, this is not a god, who is this guy? And so he called him out, and they said to Lord Vishnu, well, this is not a god, this is Swarbhanu. So Lord Vishnu got very angry, and he said, well, you're not supposed to be in this line, and he immediately beheaded him. So he sliced off his head and try to kill him, because this was completely unfair. Now, what had happened was that he had already consumed a few drops. So a few drops had already gone down his throat and somewhere in his mouth. So he was in the process of consuming this nectar when his head was getting sliced off by Lord Vishnu. Well, what happened? Well, he had already consumed the nectar of immortality, which means he couldn't die. So when his head was taken off, both his head and his body continued to live. So because he was immortal and he wouldn't die. So basically his body came into two parts, the head portion and the body portion. Now, and nobody could really do anything about it. He'd already consumed the nectar of immortality. You couldn't reverse that. So the head portion, so it became two entities, right? So the head portion is now called Rahu, and the bottom portion, the body's part is called Ketu. And because they're not, it doesn't exist. There's no human being that exists anymore, because Swarbhanu, the human being, was decapitated, wasn't into existence anymore. It was just a head and a body. And that's why it's not a real planet anymore. They're virtual planets. Now, why is it a virtual planet? Because it's immortal and it still exists there. So what is it considered? Because he came in between the sun and the moon in that line to consume the nectar, this is Rahu and Ketu is considered the shadow of the moon and the sun, really the moon. Well, the sun doesn't have a shadow. So it's considered the shadow of the moon that falls in between the earth and the sun. So the north shadow that causes the lunar eclipse is Rahu. The south shadow that causes the solar eclipse is called Ketu. So this is how they came about. Now, parts of the story were very critical, and I'll tell you which parts of it and how they signify Rahu in today's life. So let's go through the aspects of this story to see what Rahu does in our lives and what it does on a birth chart. I mentioned that Rahu was neither a god nor a demon. What that means is that Rahu doesn't always just give good results or bad results. It gives both results. It depends on the placement of Rahu. There are 4 houses in the birth chart, 3, 6, 10, and 11, that if Rahu is placed there, it gives pretty good results. And of course, the conjunction of other planets in your birth chart with Rahu determines its effect also, or the results that it will give you. A very good example is the birth chart of movie stars or actors. Now, actors are in the profession of disguise. They portray characters that they're really not. They put on makeup and they go in front of the virtual world and portray characters that they're really not. Now remember, Rahu disguised himself, got into the line, so disguise. So actors have really good placements of Rahu, which is why some of them become so successful. Remember I said he was obsessed with being a god? Exactly. Rahu gives you obsessive tendencies. It goes after something so obsessively and it gets it no matter what. Depending upon where Rahu is placed, and if you utilize that energy well in your birth chart, you can get whatever it is that you want, your desires and wishes. Now, sometimes people will use all kinds of methods. Remember I said he used all kinds of tactics, even getting in line that he wasn't supposed to do. People that have very prominent Rahus in their birth chart will stoop to no level or any measure to go after what they want. And sometimes they get them at no matter what cost they get them. But it depends if you think that it's a good thing or a bad thing. But people that have significant Rahu placements in their chart, or when they go through a Rahu Mahadasha, Antardasha, Pratyantardasha, they become very obsessed about something. What do they become obsessed about? It depends on which planet it's sitting in and which house it's sitting in. Now I'm going to give you a very good astrologer's tip. If you have your birth chart already, take a look at it and see where Rahu is placed, which house it's placed in. That is the point of your obsession for this life. So as an example, if it's placed in your 7th house, the 7th house denotes marriage and spouse. That is your obsession this lifetime, where you will always be thinking about your marriage. You will always be thinking about your spouse, and you always be thinking various things about it, good or bad. You'll always be questioning, am I happy? Is my spouse happy? What is he doing? What is she doing? What can I do for them? Is my marriage happy? So not all non-stop is what your thoughts is about your marriage and your spouse. You're always fixated on that spouse. I'm not saying fixated in a bad way, but that's your point of obsession of this whole lifetime. Now, it works for your entire life. Your birth chart is the same for your life, but these obsessive points get heightened when you go through a Rahu Mahadasha, Antardasha, or Pratyantardasha. Your obsession may get even heightened even more. Depend upon where your Rahu is placed in your birth chart. Take a look at it. Rahu is just the head portion. So it has all the 5 senses, but it doesn't have a stomach. So it can eat and eat and eat and not know when it's full. The relevance for that is that Rahu gives you unlimited, unstoppable desire. A person under the influence of Rahu just doesn't know when to stop, or when it's full, or when it's enough, or when, the boundary of how much to want. It gives you abundant desires. I'm not saying it just gives you abundant fulfillment. It just gives you the abundant desire. So a person under the malefic or the benefic influences of Rahu has uncontrolled desires and limitless desires, and just doesn't know when to stop. And sometimes in pursuit of these unlimited, boundless desires, a person will stoop to no level. And sometimes that's what takes you into the malefic influence of Rahu, because you will stoop to no level to get more and more for yourself, because you just don't know when it's a good time to stop. Rahu denotes shadows, and so shadows are like smoke, right? You don't know where you see and what you don't see sometimes. And also denotes obsessions. So Rahu is the perfect planet that actually gives you the addiction issues, especially smoking or drugs, because it's very addictive. Rahu is the one that causes addictions of drugs, and especially smoking, because smoking causes smoke, obviously, and Rahu depicts smoke. So when you have malefic influences in Rahu in your birth chart, or you're going through a Rahu phase, which is Mahadasha, Pratyantar, or Antardasha, it's very possible that you take on smoking, or you take on some of these addictions. Now, one of the keys that you have to remember is to watch for that, because this is where the malefic influence of Rahu comes in. Rahu's, remember I said, is not all good. It has certain bad things. Have you ever observed your shadow? It moves quickly, it changes shapes and size depending upon where you're standing. That's Rahu. Rahu is a shadow planet. So this depicts the elusive quality of Rahu. Rahu gives very sudden, life-changing, unexpected events in your life. The first indication that you are going through a Rahu Mahadasha or a Rahu phase is that it will give you a very sudden, unexpected event that may be life-altering. Rahu also depicts obsessions and addictions of all kinds. Remember, he was very obsessed. And since it depicts smoke and shadows as well, Rahu is the planet that gives you addiction to things like smoking, doing drugs, and also alcohol. Why? Because when you consume drugs and alcohol, it takes you away from the natural reality of the world and takes you into a virtual world, which is what Rahu is. Hence, all addictions are represented by Rahu. Malefic Rahu influences in a birth chart cause people to be addicted to substances like alcohol and drugs. Also, when a person just can't quit smoking, they're under the influence of, normally it's under the influence of Rahu, because Rahu depicts smoke, and it causes the obsession for it as well. In the story I had mentioned that, because Rahu was so obsessed about being accepted as a god, he would go to all the other gods and people, whoever he could influence, and kind of whisper in their ear to come up with little tactics and ploys of how he could get accepted as a god. Now, this represents the fact that Rahu is our inner voice. It speaks to us. It tells us what we want to do or don't want to do, and it kind of instigates us. It's not the soul that talks to us. Don't get confused with our soul that speaks to us. It's the little instigator that sits on your shoulder and tells you, you can have that extra cookie. It's so what if you're in a diet? Go ahead, have another drink. So what? You've enjoyed. So it's this little instigator voice that talks to you. It's your inner voice instigating you, telling you, you want more, go get this, go get that, you deserve this, and you deserve that. So it's your inner voice. It needs to be controlled. So next time you go grab that thing, something that you shouldn't be having, that's Rahu. You need to control it. Since Rahu is neither a god nor a demon, what that represents is the breakage of tradition and the start of something new or something foreign, something different, other than the traditional way of that they were gods and they were demons. This is something new and it's something foreign. Hence, Rahu represents all things foreign. It also represents people that are foreign to you, meaning somebody that's not quite like yourself. It could be somebody from a different culture, a different religion, a different country. So that's Rahu for you. Now, I'll give you an example of how to interpret that. Supposing your seventh house or your seventh lord, which represents marriage, is somehow influenced by Rahu or connected to Rahu. What that means is you may marry outside your norm or your culture, or your religion or your country. So you will marry somebody that's considered foreign to you. Now, foreign to you could be in different ways. They could be very different from you in something, like they could be from, like I said, a different culture, a different religion, a different race, or they could follow, something different about them that's not quite like you. So that's what Rahu is, not quite like you, something foreign. Every time somebody relocates to another country, it's represented by Rahu too, because remember, it relates to foreign. And so it represents foreign travel, it represents relocating to a foreign country. So unless you have a Rahu influence, that doesn't happen. You need to have that influence if you're looking to move out of the country. I hope I've been able to explain Rahu for most of it. It's a complex planet, hard to explain, but for most of it. My next video will be, like I said, on the transit of Mars in conjunction with Rahu. So definitely watch for that. It's extremely important and impactful for all of us. If you like this video, please give it a like, and please share it with everybody. People are watching my channel, but nobody's subscribing to it. So please subscribe to my channel. That's all I can ask you. And good luck, and I'll see you on my next video.